So I came across this search widget link creator, and one of the things I kind of like, even though it was written for a different library, is you can use it to create your baseline. So I'm gonna go ahead and use it to create my baseline search widget, and then I'm gonna show you kind of like how to modify it for yourself, make it easier, and give you a breakdown. So the first thing you want to do is you just want to select any library. It doesn't matter which one you choose. It's not important because you're going to use step 4 to modify it for your own institution. You're going to want to leave the search for blank because you're creating a search box. If you were creating an actual link, for instance, I was just if I wanted to search for something, I would put in the search there and it would create a link that would take the person to those search results, but we're not going to do that, so ignore that. You can also add a search parameter. You can add a facet. So we're going to go ahead and just choose format. I would be careful with these because our facets might be different from theirs and how they're labeled, but we're going to go ahead and just create a basic one. Now here's the part where you're going to want to change for your institution. Even though it says not recommended, we're going to do that anyway. So this is where it links to their actual library. So you're going to go ahead and you're just going to go to your Primo instance, and you're going to copy your base URL. And you're just going to go ahead and paste it there. Just the URL, including the HTTPS. Don't put the slash on the end. Copy your institution code and your view code. So this here is your view code. It's everything after the VID up until the ampersand. So go ahead and put that in the view code and your institutional code, which is usually just the beginning of that. So once you have that all completed, you're going to just hit generate, and this is going to generate the baseline code, which is what we're going to use. Now the one thing you have to remember with this baseline code, since we're using Primo VE and we're not using classic Primo, is you just want to go ahead and change this to where it says Primo dash explore. You just want to change it to discovery. And I just want to, so that'll be the correct URL. So next what you'll want to do is, this is the baseline code that you're going to use, and this is what I'm going to go ahead and put in CodePen, and then I'm going to kind of break it down and show you how easily you can create your own search boxes by doing a basic search in Primo, choosing which facets you want, and then you can kind of cut and paste and create your own boxes. So I'm going to take this code here, and then I'm going to go and put it in CodePen. So I have this, my baseline code here. And if I go ahead, and actually this is baseline code that I was working on, so I'm just going to change it back to what I had and run it in CodePen. So if I go ahead, let me just change this back to self so that this actually shows up at the bottom. So just to quickly test it to make sure, I'm going to put in test and I'm going to do a search, and it has facets. The facets I chose for this are books, so I should get a facet that says books, and that's what comes up because I'm searching for the term test. Okay, so getting back to the code and how we're going to break it down. So initially when you copy your base code, you want to make sure, depending on how you're putting in your box, you can either have it blank, which will open up in a new tab, and I'll just quickly show that how this will, when I hit search, it opens up in a new tab. So you want to keep that if that's what you like. For test purposes here, to show you, to make it easier, I'm going to change it to self. Self will just show it up in the tab that you're in, which in CodePen throws it right at the bottom. Okay, so what I like about this coding here is it has the JavaScript. It's kind of built into the URL rather than breaking it down to a form that's longer. And what I mean by that is I'm going to show you the original code that we've been using for our libguides, which is here. And of course, this has ones for drop downs. So, but even if we kind of ignore the drop downs and we were just doing a basic search, you'll notice that I have a lot of input tags here that say hidden, and this is where I would kind of like put the facets as well. Here I have a hidden facet. The problem with this, or the reason why I prefer not to use it, is because a lot of this is a lot more lines of code. As you can see, it's like almost 3 times the amount of line of code. And what often happens is it's harder to kind of maintain because you have all these hidden tags, and you have to kind of account for that. And one of the things that we were also discovering as I was working with our librarian on this is that we discovered that even if we copied the facet code and put it in here, like one example here, we were searching, if I go back to our search, and I'm just going to do a search that she wanted to create a search box for. So basically she wanted to create a search box that chose the location for our juvenile section. And what was happening is in her browser, when she did this and she copied the code here in the URL, it was showing the encoded part, and we didn't, and it wasn't working. So, and that's why I put the encoded part here to show you how it doesn't work, and it was throwing us off. And you'll see that it doesn't choose the right facet, and that's because the problem we were running to is she was copying, which was no fault of her own, it was just the browser. She was copying the encoded part when you actually need to put the unencoded part. And we use this nifty little tool here to where you can paste stuff and it'll encode and decode it. So anyway, so if I were to copy this back in our original code here, without the encoding, it'll work. And you'll see it goes to the juvenile section. Okay, so that was kind of the problem we were running in, and we were thinking there's got to be an easier way to kind of maintain this. And so that was our original code, which works fine. It works perfectly. And again, if you want to, the way we work around this, if we want to add multiple facets, we would copy this line and we would keep adding to it, right? If we wanted to have books, we would add the books facet. If we wanted to add another location, we'd add another location, because you can have multiple facets. Again, I find that this is kind of harder to maintain because you're looking through all this code. You might copy it incorrectly. So I like the other code that gets generated because all your facets that you want to put, you're basically just going to put in your string query that you can copy, right? So getting back to kind of this form to give you kind of a breakdown, the CSS and the coding, that you can customize yourself. I'm not really going to get into CSS code and stuff like that, and naming. That stuff you should be familiar with. If you're not, it's not that hard to really understand. Like for instance here, I can, instead of saying keyword, I can just call it search for stuff, right? And it'll kind of automatically change that. I can change the button, obviously. I can change it to say like look for it, you know, instead of saying search. That's fine. The key part that you really want to understand here is the input button, which is where people are going to put in their text, which is just basically creating a button, and then the function that actually gets triggered to paste their search text into your query string and then kind of fire it off to Primo. So basically you'll create an input box and give it a unique ID, and your function, again, it can be anything you want to call it, right? You can call it I could even just call this function, and I can call it my func for function, right? I could rename it. Again, that doesn't really matter. Or you could just keep it what your original code pops up. Maybe it makes it easier. But the thing here with the function is you're going to call it on the on-click when you submit. So you're not actually submitting the form with your submit button, but you're doing this function that's going to submit it. And let me just make sure that changing the name still works. Obviously, it still works. So anyway, so break down the code. So the best way to kind of modify this so you can create any search box you want is you're going to change everything that's after the dot value here. And you're going to add whatever facets you want. And you can add multiple ones. So basically this line of code here, you're going to replace with whatever facets that you decide. So if I go back here to an example and I want to search for something, what I would do is I would go to Primo, I would create a basic search, and it doesn't even have to find anything. It's just, we're just creating the search with all the facets that are available. So let's say I want to search for all ebooks. I would apply the books filter, and then I would apply the available online filter. Now I have two filters here, and I'll probably even throw in a third. So I want available online and open access. So now I have three. I'm creating a search box that is going to search for these three unique facets here: books, available online, and open access. So from there, I'm just going to copy my entire URL here, and then I'm going to kind of break it down so I can piece out the part that I need to stick into my code. So I'm just going to go ahead and just paste this in a kind of notepad tool, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the line until I get to the part where it begins the M facet. And usually what I do is I just hit enter so I can make sure that I'm pulling it correctly, and I'm going to scroll all the way over until I finish the next facet. So I know I have three of them because they're labeled M facet, comma 1, comma 2, and comma 3. So I don't need the ampersand language and everything after that. So this is basically the code I need that I'm going to paste into my base code. So I copy this, and then I go back to my base code, and I'm going to replace here where it says and facet, and I'm just going to go ahead and replace all of that. And that should include all three facets. So if I go ahead and search for something and hit look for it, you'll see that my three facets show up. And then from there, I can just copy this widget that I've created. I can paste it anywhere I need it in LibGuides, any web page, whatever that handles JavaScript and HTML. So the nice thing about this here is you can build different search widgets simply by going to your Primo instance, doing a search, picking which facets you want, copying the code in your URL, replacing it in your base code, and then copying your entire base code and putting it wherever you want. The nice thing about Primo is that unlike our EDS that uses tokens, there are no tokens in your URL, so this should work all the time, right? The only thing that we have to worry about, and this is something everybody worries about when they write code like this, is if for any reason the names of the facets change, you're going to have to fix this code if it changes. If you notice not working, it's probably because maybe the facet name has changed. So there might be an update or something to where open access is no longer called open access, and that they might have changed it to say something like open access, and it's labeled, you know, without the hyphen. So that's just something to be careful as stuff breaks. But Like I said, this base code that I pulled is really easy to create your own code, because basically you're just sending them this to this URL and you're kind of building it, which is kind of nice, as opposed to what we were doing before, which I imagine a lot of people are doing. They're using these input hidden tags to kind of build their link, which there's nothing wrong with it. It works, but I feel like it's a lot of code to maintain and a lot trickier to kind of build, because sometimes when you're cutting and pasting, or even when you're typing, you might misspell things incorrectly, right? I might forget to label this number 2 or something like that, or a comma, or what have you. So I think it's easier to kind of use this base code. So again, just to kind of review, what you're going to do is you're going to go to this page, create a simple search box to create your base code. You're going to go and put in your domain name, institutional code, and your view code. Generate your base code, copy it. I would encourage people to use something like JS Fiddle or CodePen to kind of do their testing, because it's a lot easier than copying it into kind of a libguide, refreshing, saving it, and kind of thing. This is stuff that you can make changes on the fly and you can test. So once you have your code working the way you want it, again, if you want to change this to a blank, just put the word blank. And if I test it, it'll open up in a blank page and go from there. So I hope this helps. If anybody has any questions, feel free to kind of like post them in Basecamp and I can explain more.